Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning, friends. Let me bring up the chat here so I can see. This is a little bit of an unexpected and rare occasion where I'm doing one of these on a Saturday. I'm doing it later in the day. I don't know. Maybe people on the West Coast will be more apt to join. I realize I do these a lot like early in the morning before I kind of start my day. And there's a reason why I'm doing one of these on a Saturday morning at 9:15 my time. Um, if I open this up, you'll see it's snowing. Welcome to spring in Maine. We call this the spring of deceit, right? Because it's snow is piling up outside as I speak. We're going to get quite a storm today. I think it's going to let up for a little while, and then I can go and do the things that I need to do. But normally Saturday is when I take care of stuff. Stuff like getting groceries, and we don't have. I live out in the middle of nowhere, so we don't have trash pickup. So I have to take all my trash in to somewhere. I normally do that on a Saturday. I don't quite know yet if I'm going to do that today or if I'm going to go anywhere today. But I'm here, and nice to see you all joining in. Welcome, welcome, welcome everybody to the broadcast. Today I'm talking about spirituality without religion. The in many polls all over the world, the fastest growing sort of segment where people self-identify spiritually is as spiritual but not religious, right? Having no religious affiliation. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. As I would say that I am a person who is quite spiritual. I make my living spiritually, and spirituality is a major component of my life. And yet I'm not affiliated with any organized religion. Now, let me state this up front, and I may state this several times for people who are joining later. I have nothing against anybody's religion. I am not going to religion bash here. That's not what this is about. I'm going to talk about spirituality. I'm going to talk about how you can do spirituality. There are many people who are very spiritual who don't connect with an organized religion. And that's really what I'm talking about here. I'm really talking about kind of spirituality on your own versus spirituality in the context of some sort of organized religion, some church, temple, mosque, what have you. And again, if you are a religious person, meaning you go to church, you go to temple, or you identify with a particular faith, no issues for me whatsoever. I'm not going to bash you. That is totally fine. Some people get very defensive, and I understand why, right? There is a lot of bashing and stuff that goes on. And I will say this as well. I am currently in training as a metaphysical minister. So I don't know when I will finish. It's a lot of work, a lot of study, academic training. So so I am becoming a minister, but in the a metaphysical ministry. So not so much about the dogma as much as the practice and sort of the mystical aspect of spirituality, which I have always been interested in since I was a boy, and I'm still a boy at heart. But I'm older. I'm most people would not refer to me as a boy these days, because I'm 52. What are you gonna do? A friend of mine just turned 50 yesterday, and I was like, "Hey, man, 50 is nifty." So far, so good. I can't complain. There are things about being 50. My body doesn't heal as quickly as it used to if I hurt myself. Um, but physically, I'm pretty good. I'm in pretty good shape. I'm getting a full physical. I just got a new doc who gave me a look over, and fine, getting a full physical in about a month. Looking forward to that. because there's stuff they do to you when you're 50 that you don't do to you when you're 30. But I understand it all. I get it. Um, so anyway, yeah, I had my testosterone level checked, and I was like, I feel like it might be a little low. I don't know, because men's testosterone declines as they go, as they go down. It makes it harder to do things like lose weight and be intimate. And not that I'm having any troubles, but I had it checked, and they were like, no, no, absolutely normal, absolutely fine. So good news for me so far. So 52 is pretty good. Not a boy anymore. So let's talk about spirituality, and let's talk about what I mean when I use the term spiritual or spirit or spirituality. And it's not that, if you've tuned in before, you know that I try to define my terms when I use a term like spirituality, not because I think my definition should surpass yours, or is better than yours in any way. It's just that I want people to understand what I mean, right? And so, if you haven't understand, like if I say this is what I mean when I say this word, then the communication is better and there's less misunderstanding, hopefully. So, um, I define spirituality very loosely, and I think lots and lots of things can be spiritual. Lots of activities can be spiritual. Spiritual activity or spirituality is anything that helps you experience, whether through feeling or what you see and hear, whatever, being connected to something greater than yourself. That's it. Now, in that respect, lots of things fall in. It's a very loose term. Lots of things fall into that. And somebody who is completely materialist, atheistic, whatever, can still have spiritual experiences. They might not recognize it as spirit or spiritual. They might not recognize deity. They might not recognize, I come from a background of animism. I'm a shamanic practitioner, and shamanism and animism go hand in hand. Um, so so they might not, but they can have a spiritual experience. If you feel connected to nature, for example, if you feel in awe of nature, if I've ever gone to the Grand Canyon or anywhere that's just amazing, I've been lucky in my life that I have visited some places. I'm always in awe of nature. I can go to the coast of Maine, not far from where I live, and um, definitely be in awe of the coast and the water and the beach and the rocks and all of those things. But I've been to places like Niagara Falls, and I've been to places like the Grand Canyon, and I've been to just places that will, for me, really took my breath away in nature and make you feel like there is something greater than yourself out there. And that might be for you, that might be nature, or it might be deity. It might be, you might use the word God or source or the universe or what have you, to refer to that which is greater than yourself. So anything you do, in my take, my definition of spirituality is anything you do that enhances that connection, that feeling of connection to that which is greater than yourself. Whether you use the term God, or you have multiple gods and goddesses, or you use the term spirit, or you use the term nature or source or the universe, whatever term you want to use, is totally fine. I think that is being spiritual. I think that is spiritual activity, whatever you do. Um, on the mystical path, you begin to identify a little bit with, not even a little bit, sometimes completely, you begin to identify with that which is greater than yourself. And I'll say that mysticism takes place in every, there is a mystical aspect in every single religion I have ever seen. Every single form of spirituality, there's a mystical side to that. It is not always front and center. Some forms of spirituality are completely mystical. Some and mystical again is about merging consciousness with that which is greater, merging consciousness with source, with divinity, with gods and goddesses. I practice shamanism. Shamanism is very mystical. It is mystical and animistic and lots of those things. So there is mystical Christianity, mystical Islam, mystical Judaism. You might know them under different labels, like Gnosticism is a mystical form of Christianity, but there are others. There are lots of Christian mystics out there, some of whom are considered saints. Um, in Islam, you have Sufism. Sufism is extremely mystical. I remember this was great. There was, you've probably seen, if you're not familiar with Sufism, dervishes who are um, men and sometimes women who dance. They wear like the they spin, right? The whirling dervishes. Those are Sufis. That is one branch of Sufism that where they dance. And I remember, I've always been fascinated with these guys. I'm going to say guys, but I realized that women do Sufi dancing too in some places. Um, so see these guys and they're spinning around, and I'm like, oh, I don't know why. I'm really fascinated by that. It's really kind of interesting. And there was an interview with one of these Sufi dancers, and he said, when I start to spin, I feel that angels are lifting me up, right? So this is a very good morning. I know it's a weird time, right? Weird time and a weird day for me to be doing. And I did one of these yesterday. So, but good morning to you. I'm talking about spirituality and spirituality with religion, and at the moment I'm talking about mysticism, and I was talking about this Sufi dancer that I read an interview with, and who said, when I dance, when I start to spin, I feel as if angels are taking me by the arms and lifting me up. That is what a what a beautiful description of a mystical experience that is, right? There are, in Christian mysticism, you have people like Hildegard von Bingen, who was like a cloistered nun, but who like locked herself away. Oftentimes, you you associate asceticism with mysticism. They don't have to go hand in hand, but they can. Um, so you have lots of mystics in Christianity. Talk about Sufism in Islam. In Judaism, you have Kabbalah. If you're not familiar with Kabbalah, this is a there's so Kabbalah is ostensibly Jewish mysticism, but there are Christian versions of it, and there are what they call Hermetic versions of it. They all use Hebrew names, letters, and they all use the. This is a book. This is a rather old book. This is from like 1990. Simplified Magic. That is a diagram of the um, tree of life in Kabbalah. And I haven't read this book yet. I should. Maybe I'll read it today. While I'm snowed in. I'm snowed in. That's why. That's why I'm doing this. I can't go run my errands. That's right. I'm wearing my bear. I'm wearing my bear sweater because it's cold and it's snowy out. So Kabbalah is a Jewish form of mysticism, and Kabbalists really, really complex stuff. These guys can study their entire life and learn all of the math and the alphabet and the all of these things. So complicated stuff, but they're so in Kabbalah there is what's called the lightning path, which goes down the tree of life, and it goes from divinity down, and it is a model of how basically reality is created. It's a model of creation. But then human beings are we're at the bottom, we're in Malkuth, which is kingdom, and we're supposed to we're supposed to wind our way back up the tree of life like a snake. Sound familiar? Book of Genesis, anybody? To the top and return our consciousness to divinity. So therefore it is both a magical path when you come down and you manifest things into reality, and it is a mystical path when you go up and you join your consciousness with divinity. So you can study Kabbalah without joining a religion. Here's a book. There's probably hundreds of books in English, let alone all of the other languages and the ones and the traditional ones that are in Hebrew. I don't read Hebrew, so maybe I should study Hebrew someday. It'd be a very interesting thing to do. Hebrew and Greek would be really cool languages to know if you're interested at all in spirituality. You can read texts in their original without translation. I talked to somebody once who was in divinity school, um, who uh, I forget. I think it was Lutheran divinity school. But don't quote me on that. This was decades ago. Um, and she was telling me that part of their divinity school they had to learn biblical Greek and translate the gospels from Greek into English. Why, might you ask, would somebody do that? Because we have English, we have the King James Bible, right? We have the English version of the Bible. And she said that many, probably the majority of the people in her school, in her class, translating the Gospels from biblical Greek, wound up having a crisis of faith because, I don't know, is the English, how good is that English translation? Now, I think the King James Bible is a beautiful book of poetic language. Um, written at the time of Shakespeare, if you believe that Shakespeare actually wrote all his stuff, by a number of authors and that sort of thing. Good morning. Oh, you went to Lutheran private school. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you can have, one of I've never been to a service, but there is not far from me. I may go to a service someday just to check it out. There's what's called a Unity Church or Unity Spiritual Center, and they are non-dogmatic, non-denominational. You go to service there and there's music and they meditate together and they have like healing sessions and all kinds of stuff. We're and that that kind of thing is interesting to me, around spiritual community, and I do want to talk about spiritual community a little bit. One of the things, so I come from, my mom's side of my family was very religious. My dad's not so much. My grandmother, on my dad's side, was Catholic and got divorced, which back then meant you got booted out of the church. You were excommunicated. Her husband was abusive. Um, Not my grandfather. She married my grandfather after, and he was non-religious. But she, if you went to my grandmother's house, she had a crucifix on the wall and a picture of the Pope on her bureau and whatever. So she still had faith, but was not practicing. She didn't go to church or take communion or what have you. And her funeral was um, not a Catholic funeral either. But I know she was upset that I was never baptized, which is funny. I had I had some dear friends. The husband is now departed, but a couple. They were retired couple living in Florida, and I went to visit them one time. And she had been a nun early on in life and had left the nun, the nunhood, the nunnery. Nunnery is the place. She'd left the nunhood, whatever, and then wound up later getting married and having kids and all that sort of thing. But in their retirement, they had become um, lay ministers, I guess, in the Catholic Church. They were empowered to give certain rites. They could do like baptisms and last rites and that sort of thing. So went out to dinner with them one time, and I was sitting across the table. I was like, "Yeah, I think my grandmother was upset that my parents never had me baptized." And she like scrunched up her face and she looked at me. She goes, "No, no, no, you've been baptized." And I'm like, "No, no, no, I was never baptized." She goes, "You were never baptized." I was never baptized. And she stuck her fingers in the glass of water in front of her on the table at this restaurant and flung the water across and then did the sign of the cross. She goes, "You're baptized." So I guess officially, I don't know officially, there's no record or anything, but I've been baptized at least by one person. Um, but I just thought that that was really funny. Didn't want me to go to purgatory. I get it. I get it. Or I guess I don't know. As an adult, if you die unbaptized, I don't know what the doctrine on that is. So anyway, I grew up, and one side of my family was very religious, and the other side was non-religious, and so I don't know where I was going with that story. Kind of lost track. Um, Glad you thought that was funny. I thought it was a funny story, and it's so this my friend Jeanette is the woman's name who baptized me. Um, she's French, and a lot, English is a second language, and she was a nun. So I would like anytime I got together with them, I would find like a really really dirty joke to tell her, a filthy joke, and she would like I would say something like, this I would tell I'm like, hey, I got a joke for you, and I would tell her a dirty joke, and she would think about it, and like oftentimes jokes don't translate. Like she's in her head, she's translating the joke into French so she can try to understand it, and she's like can't make sense. She can't make sense out of it, and she's like, oh, huh, and she would think about it, and then a half hour later or something, she would turn to me and she would like smack me in the shoulder. Um, so I think, you got to have a sense of humor, particularly with former nuns, particularly French Catholic nuns. Um, she never hit me with a ruler, but I do know people who were hit with rulers and yardsticks in school and stuff like that. I did not go to parochial school, but heard once that being baptized puts a seal of the Holy Spirit you over like a covenant with God. Do they talk about that much in any teachings you've had? I assume we're born with that covenant. I don't know. So the practice of baptism and the doctrine of baptism, my understanding, and this may be off depending upon who your depending on what church and what faith you go to, right? Depending on what church you belong to. So my experience with baptism and having conversations about baptism and being baptized by somebody across a restaurant table, um, is that the purpose of baptism is to, I don't want to say wipe out, but it's to eliminate original sin. It's to wash away original sin. It's why some churches, like Southern Baptist Church, for example, you have to actually be completely immersed in water to be baptized. Now, and this is a good point. So, the meanings of ceremony, there might be doctrine around the meaning of a ceremony like baptism, but they might have different meaning and have a deeper spiritual meaning for the person who's taking part. Now, for me, like somebody flinging water across the table and making the sign of the cross, because I wasn't raised Catholic or whatever, it was kind of a funny event for me to have happen, um, more than anything. But to her, like it was, even though she sort of did it like, "Oh, you're baptized." For her it was important, and for my grandmother I guess it was important, because if you die without being baptized you don't go to the good place, right? Because you die without the stain of original sin. Now I remember going to a baptism for a baby, in a church where they baptize babies, and uh the person who was doing the baptism, it was a Catholic church, but it wasn't a priest who was doing it was another lay person doing the baptism. Was talking about how the baby is born without the light of God until they get baptized. So that's the I don't know if that's the doctrine or the dogma or the whatever, but you know, uh you can't you can't uh get into heaven without the baptism, and babies who die before baptism go to purgatory for a while or something. I don't know, and I forget. I forget when purgatory was invented, but it was a concept that is not original to Christianity or to Judaism. It was invented. I mean, and by original, I mean it's not part of any of the texts. It's doctrine that came up like in the 4th century or the 5th century, or even maybe in as late as the 7th century, something like that. In kindergarten, they brought private tutors to learn languages, and I never forgot it because I learned really young. Some languages provide new understanding for our own languages. Absolutely, right? So there, you know, different languages, and I'm not really fluent in anything else. I have like passable tourist versions of different. Like I can ask where the bathroom is in multiple languages, and but the way, like, just the concepts are completely different. It's almost like your brain is wired. I always admire people who are multilingual. When I was married, my mother-in-law could speak, I think, 6 languages fluently. So she was from the Philippines, and she spoke Ilocano, Tagalog, Spanish, English, German, and I think French. And I can't even imagine keeping all that stuff in your head. And was fluent in all of them, and would switch back and forth when it was convenient. um, she would say she would say things when she wanted to say something a little naughty, she would say it usually in Tagalog or Ilocano. But her husband actually didn't speak Ilocano because his family was from a different region of the Philippines. So they would speak Tagalog together. She would speak Ilocano to her family back home. Um, and then to me, she would mostly speak English, but sometimes like say something naughty to me. And then um, because the naughty bits are the fun parts to learn of any language, you learn those first. So I learned a lot of words for words for private parts and for sex, and that's and sort of the 12-year old's version of the language, as well as like how to ask where the bathroom was and say I remember gotomna ako means I'm very hungry. It's like it's like hungry me is what you're saying. I'm very, very hungry. Um, I'm very, very hungry. And masarap means delicious. So if you ever go to an Asian store where they're selling Filipino food, and you'll often see like masarap on the food label. It's delicious. Um, but like, even things like greetings in other languages and stuff like that are really interesting in the way that they think, like adios, right? Adios, goodbye in Spanish. It's like go with God, right? Good morning, nice to see you. Makes me feel weird because I feel like we're all born in God's light, and I always ask questions in church Bible study. They'd reinforce with, "This is how it is." Yeah, well, me too. That's that's a lot of people, right? So at the beginning of this, and many of you are tuning in later than the beginning, I talked about how in recent polls, the largest growing response about spirituality is people identifying as spiritual but not religious. Why are people leaving religions in droves, right? But still maintaining spirituality? Well, I think spirituality is important to people. It gives, for those who it is important, it gives people connection. It gives people hope. It gives us something to rely on. It makes us feel like we have a place in this world. And but we are now exposed to information, and like the world is a much smaller place now that we are living in the information age. When I was born and growing up, so here's an interesting story. So, and I promise this is related, it's not just a tangent. um so a good friend of mine also grew up in the Philippines, and the Philippines is 85% Roman Catholic, and then a good portion of people who are not Catholic are Muslim, but they live in uh, mostly live in their own region of the country. There's a Muslim region of the Philippines. But the rest of the country, because they were conquered by Spain, who was there for hundreds of years, um, is Roman Catholic. And so my friend went to school, and it was Catholic school. And she said, "Yeah." She goes, and we had to take this religion class, and they said, okay, this is what we believe. What do other religions believe? She was, probably 8 or 9 years old. And she's like, what do you mean other religions? Like, she had no concept, because of the environment that she was raised in, that there were other religions, that there were people who believed other things or went to other types of churches in the world, because it was very small. So for me growing up, I didn't, I never met anybody. In the small town that I grew up in and everything, I never met anybody who was Muslim. I never met. I had a few Jewish friends, very small number of people in my town who were Jewish. A very large portion uh, Catholic, because the town I grew up was settled, or not settled, but there were a big influx of people from Canada, from the French area of Canada, including my grandmother and her family. Um, and then, so it was, mostly Catholic, Protestant, and then there was like a Jewish temple, right? I think there are two Jewish temples. Lots of churches, lots of Protestant churches, lots of Catholic churches. A lot of the Catholic churches have closed down now. Um, but that was it. I wasn't exposed to a lot of different ideas. Then I went to college in Boston, right? And around me, we had, you know, just walking around on the street, you had Scientology and the Hare Krishna temple, and lots, like a whole, like there's a very large Jewish sections of Boston suburbs. Very large population Jewish. There's a I love this, and it's very good. A kosher Chinese restaurant, right? Like I couldn't even conceive of that growing up. Like, I knew what kosher was, but a kosher Chinese restaurant. So a Chinese restaurant that caters specifically to Jewish people who keep kosher, and the food's amazing, by the way. So no pork, and things are prepared in that way, and lots of Jewish delis and that sort of thing. It was fantastic, right? So I got exposed to a lot more things. Now we live in the information age, and I can learn yoga online. I can attend Buddhist empowerment ceremonies through Zoom. I can, learn shamanism, from a mentor online. I teach students all over the world. I have students in Australia, in Thailand. I have in Europe, in Canada. I have clients all over the world that I see. Right, we live in the information age. I didn't even like when I didn't even know what the word shaman meant. I don't know when I first heard that word, but it was kind of a strange thing. And growing up, there were a few witchy people in the area. But I sort of came of age. I was a teenager during the Great Satanic Panic, so anything that wasn't Christian, you ran the risk of being rounded up by the cops if there was a crime in town, that they could pin to any sort of, there are Satan worshipers eating babies in our town. It was a lot like the witch trials, very much so. So these days, a lot of people are not. There are a lot of reasons why people might leave an organized religion, and people will sort of church shop as well. People who want the church or whatever, but they'll shop around and find the one. And some are more welcoming than others, right? for one, people I think are a little bit many people are a little bit fed up with the intermix of politics and religion. And I'm a very spiritual person, but I think there needs to be a strong separation between church and state. I think it's the only way that minority populations get protected. We have a real rollback of things in the U.S. That is striking, and and again, like I'm not arguing with anybody's spiritual beliefs, but if you need to impose if you're going to use the legal system to impose your religious beliefs or your idea about what is moral behavior or whatever onto others, that's really problematic for a lot of reasons. You might have power now, but that might not always be the case, and you might not agree with somebody else 20 years down the line who takes power and decides that hey, look, you set the rule that I can use my religion to dictate your behavior. And just because you don't belong to my religion doesn't mean anything. I'm in power now. I can enforce that. There's a whole lot of reasons why separation of church and state, I think, is just a really, really good idea in general. And we get into really dangerous territory with totalitarianism, authoritarianism, all of those isms. Um, the flip side of that, and so it's not about religion, it's about ideology more than anything for me. Um, there's a great, I think it's great, Netflix series out now, which is based on a Chinese novel called The Three Body Problem. And it's sci-fi, but it also shows like the it shows some stuff about the Cultural Revolution in China and how people were like, you teach the Big Bang Theory in physics class, and we're going to beat you to death because that goes against our ideology." And that stuff happens, and it happens today. We see it, yeah. If you're in the U.S. or wherever you live in a fairly the U.S. is becoming a less liberal society, but you live in a liberal society, and I don't mean that politically. I mean liberal in the sense that there is freedom. There's freedom to believe as you choose, to hold the ideas that you choose. Um, Things can become less so really quickly, but we see that with the Uyghurs, for example, in China, who are basically being put into concentration camps for re-education. Right? We saw it with Tibet. We see it. We see people being imprisoned all over the world for ideology. So that's a really dangerous thing. And so anyway, so there are a lot of people who are dissatisfied with that. There are a lot of people for whom they're like, I really kind of like these ideas, but I don't like these other ideas. Like, I don't like you teaching, for me personally, I don't love the doctrine of original sin, that babies are born flawed, that babies are born with the stink of sin on them and are doomed to hell unless they, are baptized or whatever. I don't love that a whole lot. I don't love the doctrine. Um, and one of the reasons why one of the many reasons why I was afraid if I was baptized that the water would set on fire or whatever. I realized there's oil in many faiths. There's oil involved as well. There's holy oil as well as holy water. Um, Interestingly, the word Christ means anointed, as in anointed with oil, and has the same roots as and this is, don't think I'm saying anything offensive by this. This is just, the way it has the same root as the word grease, right? Coming from oil, right? Because being anointed with oil was a thing, and still is in some faiths. So a lot of people branch out, and a lot of people become really syncretistic, and I like that. I'm sort of the mind where and this may run counter to a lot of people's belief systems, but I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach to interacting with spirit that works. for everyone, and that's not how I teach either. Um, when I teach students, particularly in one-on-one mentorships, um, stuff will happen, and students will go, "Well, is this okay?" And the answer is always, "Of course it is. That's what happened to you. You're reporting it to me." And the other thing, and some students may find this frustrating. So I teach what's called shamanic journeying frequently, and that's this altered state where people go into spiritual realities and interact with spirits. And they're like, "I saw this in my journey. What does that mean?" And I don't interpret other people's journeys for them. And students might find that frustrating sometimes. They want to come to me for answers. I don't want to provide answers. I want to provide experiences. I want to guide students to find their own answers. Shamanism is a path of personal revelation, meaning you get your own answers. And your answers, because you're an individual, are right for you. You know, I'm not gonna ask you to interpret my journeys either, or my dreams, or I do sometimes for clients, do dream interpretation, if it's important. Used to do for, I think for a couple years, I did a radio spot, in the morning where this morning radio show would call me up, and they would have their listeners call in with dreams, and I would do dream interpretation, and that was fun. um, until people would call me, and I could. It was challenging as well because people would call sometimes, and I could tell there was a huge amount of unhealed trauma in their background, and I'm like, okay, I think you should probably talk to somebody and get some help. And they're like, "Oh, that's not funny." I'm like, "No, that's not funny." Oh, it was a fun but tough gig in morning drive, and really like put me on the spot a lot of times. But it was cool as well. There were, there were times where I feel like I really was able to, in a short period of time, like 5 minutes, um, where some of the things I offered were very helpful to people as well. So I wouldn't have done it if I didn't think it was helpful. If it was just, and the hosts were really super nice. The morning show. It was a very popular morning show here. So it was funny because I had just started dating. I just started dating somebody when the show started, who later became my girlfriend. Um, and she's like, "I just heard you on the radio. You're kind of a big deal," and which made me laugh because I'm not kind of a big deal. And then I told the host that I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this woman heard me on the radio, and we just started dating." And she said, "You're kind of a big deal." And they're like, "Well, I hope you're not going to demand like celebrity money from us or something like that." I'm like, no, no, I don't think I'm a celebrity, and I don't think I'm that big a deal. But it was funny. It was funny and really interesting, um, and kind of a fun thing to do. And I did every once in a while. I would run into somebody who was like, "I just heard you on the radio," and that was, that's kind of cool. Um, but neither here nor there. I'm not a big fame found kind of person. I realize I do these live things, and I teach a lot of classes and stuff. And my business is dependent upon a certain amount of people knowing who I am and coming to me for services or teaching or something. But so, like, look how much of a mess my hair is. I fixed that right before I gotta get it cut. It's crazy. Um, anyway, back to the topic on hand. So I do think it's important, if spirituality is a source of strength for you, a source of connection, a source of healing for you, and it can be all of those things, right? And it can be all of those things with or without an organized religion. Again, I am not bashing organized religion here. I'm not bashing anybody's belief system. I'm just talking about how many people are you know, are disidentifying with a specific religious faith, but still identify as very spiritual and practice spirituality. And I know a lot of those people. The shamanic community is rife for those. That being said, I know people who are Jewish and practice shamanism. I know people who identify as Christian and practice shamanism. I know somebody who's a Buddhist, a Zen Buddhist reishi who practices shamanism. Um, Shamanism is not necessarily. And I know people who just practice shamanism and don't do anything else spiritual. So you can be all kinds of things. I know somebody who's a witch and practices shamanism. So you can be all kinds of things. I have a really challenging time to put a label on my personal belief system. I would say that I'm shamanic and animist, but my practices range. And like I said at the beginning, I'm actually studying to become a metaphysical minister, not going to divinity school, but I'm studying with a metaphysical ministry to be ordained, and that's just for my own kind of personal stuff. And their stuff takes a very, I would say, Christian light flavor. They talk about Christ a lot in the materials that I'm studying, but they're talking about the Christ that was in Jesus, as opposed to Jesus the Christ, the only, the only. Um, I don't want to go too far into the theological difference there, but it really jived with my own belief system that the word, first of all, the word Christ is a title; it's not a name. Jesus's last name was not Christ. I said Jesus the Christ, Jesus Christ. It was Jesus the Christ, the christened, the anointed, the one who has connect this mystical connection with deity. And I realize that is not everybody's faith. Totally fine. Um, but that jived with my own personal thing, and that everybody has the capacity for what could be called Christ consciousness, also could be called universal consciousness, also could be called God mind, or um, connection with a holy guardian angel, or whatever, lots of different terms depending on how you want to view it. And in my opinion, all kind of the same thing. So my path is very, not that you necessarily need to care what my path is. My path is very mystical, animist, shamanism, but that doesn't mean I don't practice a lot of I practice a lot of ritual as well. But there's a mystical component to any ritual that I practice. There's a lot that has to do with uh, raising of consciousness, we'll put it that way, or altering of consciousness. Um, so awesome to see you all here this morning. I didn't know, this is not my usual time, not my usual day. As I said, it's I'll raise my I usually keep the shade lowered, otherwise there's a lot of backlight coming in, but you see that? That's what we call snow. I know some of you are in places where it doesnn't snow, or you're definitely not getting snow right now. And especially like it's March 23rd, well after the spring equinox. That's Maine for you. We had our false spring. We actually had a false spring like in December. It was really warm. It was warmer through most of December than it has been for all of March. Weather's getting really weird, folks. Climate change is real. I don't care if they tell you it isn't. This is not, I grew up in Maine, and this is not the same as when I grew up. Um, we would often have snow on Halloween. Uh, and we could definitely get snow this late in the year, but we didn't have Decembers where it hit almost 60 degrees out. Like, that's really, really weird. I can't imagine the effect that that's having on like the animals in the area. So like the rabbits their fur turns white, right? So that they can hide from predators in the snow when it gets snowy. But then we didn't have any snow all winter. So then they stand out like a sore thumb. So does that increase the predator population? I don't know. But I'm sure like everything affects everything. There's a great documentary, by the way, on it was controversial at the time, but they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone Park back in the day, and I think it was like a dozen wolves or something, because the wolves had been wiped out years ago. So they reintroduced wolves. It changed everything. It changed the ecosystem. It changed the way the prey behaved, which the prey were, mostly herbivores like deer and smaller animals. It changed the way they behaved and actually caused, new growth of plant life that caused streams to fill back up with water. Like, fascinating how one thing affects another, and is a really important spirit. I'm going to bring this back to a spiritual concept. A really important aspect of spirituality is interconnection. How is everything interconnected with everything? So you think of something like the butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in the rainforest of Brazil, and it causes a tsunami in, Indonesia. And so everything is interconnected. In Buddhism, this is called Indra's Web. And see, like, every consciousness is connected to every other consciousness. It's visualized as this big web. In Norse mythology, you had the web of weird, which is, where we get the word weird from, but the web of weird is also a type of fate. There's weird and orlog. There's two big types of fate. There's a type of fate that sort of can't be changed, right? So they're like you can't change that the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning, right? It's type cause and effect stuff, maybe have been put into effect billions of years ago, but there's a cause, there's an effect. You can't change that. There's certain things that are absolutely fated. But then there's personal fate, and I'm going down this pathway, and I'm interconnected to all things. And if you pull on those strings of fate, you pull in the string between me and you, or between me and whatever, and we're affected somehow. So things that I do. So coming on here and talking to you all, that has an effect. It puts some kind of effect out into the world. I drink coffee, so I purchase coffee. I think it's an interesting thing, right? Because my definition of spirituality is that which makes us feel connected to that which is greater than ourselves. And that which is greater than ourselves could be everything, right? It could be the concept of everything, not just the universe, but the multiverse. So I drink coffee that I make from home. I go and buy coffee from the grocery store. I give them money. They pay local workers, right? The coffee comes from somewhere. So those farmers make a little bit of money, and the people that so the fact that I drink this cup of coffee has affected in a small way, but over time that could be a big effect. And again, the butterfly effect can branch out dozens, maybe hundreds of people, maybe more. I don't know. Has an effect on the environment, I'm sure. Probably a somewhat negative effect on the environment. I do my best to stay environmentally friendly. Um, but, you know, so the very act of drinking coffee in the morning, we might not think, I might think that I'm really disconnected from everything else in the universe. This is just I'm just having a cup of coffee this morning. But this little act, and it's something to consider for yourself. Everything that you do, everything that you purchase, every interaction that you have, ripples out. Like, if you drop the whole drop a stone in the pond and the ripples go out, right? You matter and you affect the world, right? Everything you do affects the world. The vibes that you generate in yourself affect the world. The way that you speak to people. I have a thing when I go out into the world and I interact with people in the world that, um, and this is something you can try too, because so often, depending on where you live, um, I live in the Northeast, and people are very business-like when they go about their business, and whatever. Um, if I go, let's say I go to the grocery store, I gotta try, like, if the snow slows down a little bit, I gotta go to the grocery store. So, um, when I go to the grocery store and the cashier checks me out, I do my best to make they'll say, "Oh, how are you doing today? Did you find everything?" I must be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good." Right? I try to make eye contact. I try to give them my attention for at least a few seconds while we're interacting. I'm doing great. How are you? And pause and hold space for them to actually answer. And they might give me a perfunctory answer, and that's fine. That's fine. But for that second, I have given that person my attention. I have hopefully, at least on an unconscious level, imprinted that you're important, even though this encounter is very transactional. You, just because you're a human being, are important. At least to me, you are important. And it doesn't matter what kind of morning you had or how hurried you are, or even if you're rude to me, which doesn't happen very often, and especially not here. People, not where I live. People are generally fairly friendly. Um, but I do try when I interact with anybody, I do try to give them my attention and give them space. And I think that in a way, like even if you are non-spiritual, non-religious, I think in a way that's a bit of a blessing because we don't get that a whole lot. Our attention in this there's an attention economy, right? We're on, I see people in line quite a lot, um, checking out or whatever, and they're on their phones. They're not even paying attention to what's going on with the other person, right? And I get it, we're all busy, but everybody's. It's interesting because I moved back to Maine like 14 years ago from Boston. I was living in Boston. And when I moved from Boston, you couldn't really use your cell phone on the subway. There was no signal, right? And then the cell phone companies got the bright idea of putting cell transmitters and repeaters in the subway tunnels. And so in recent years, when I've gone back, if I've gone on the subway, which is pretty rare, everybody's like this with their phone. Everybody's in here. Nobody is paying attention to what's going on around them and I realize like subway public transportation people really like to just zone out. And I get that. I do. I understand that. People might read a newspaper or read a book or, whatever in the past, but not always. I had some crazy encounters, some crazy subway encounters in my day. Um, Subway is a great equalizer. You get on that with people you know, going to jobs in the financial sector and to people at the same time, people just coming out of raves that they've been at all night and they're high as kites and getting on the subway. So it's kind of this interesting cross section of humanity on the subway. There's some people who never rode the subway. Very, very, very wealthy people never rode the subway, but it was an interesting cross section of society anyway. Subway trains and commuter rails and that sort of things, public transport. Um, but yeah, I mean, depending on where you live, we don't give people our attention. And there's a million devices these days that are vying for our attention. And you know, uh, it- one of the things that was always like weird to me, I remember getting into a cab one time, and there were you get into the cab. I don't know if this is still the way. I haven't taken a cab in ages. Getting into a cab, and there would be um, flipping uh, ads. There'd be the thing they could swipe your credit card on. You get in a cab, and all of a sudden, an ad was blaring at you directly in front of your face, right? And then they always had ads on the outside of cabs, and there'd be like a little placard inside with maybe an advertisement in it. But to have a video advertisement blaring in your face while you're just getting a ride somewhere, it's like, oh, wow, that's intrusive into my space. So I guess I'm a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of a hermit. I'm a little bit of a homebody. I don't like being uh nowadays it's harder for me to be exposed to a lot of stimuli that's like advertising stimuli. I don't think like I try to pay attention to my energy level. I'm lucky, like I live in a state where the state of Maine, it's highway billboards are actually illegal. So when we drive around the highway, there's no billboards, and that's really nice. It's just pristine. It's really a nice thing that they did that. There are billboards in cities, like you'll have a billboard on a building, and that's fine. But on the freeways and the highway, we don't call them freeways here, but on the turnpike, on the highway, on rural routes and stuff like that. No billboards, no side of the road billboards. Um, and that's kind of nice. It's funny because every once in a while I'll go down to Boston or whatever, and like you cross the line and it's billboard, 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 billboard. You can't even drive without, advertising information being in your face. That's challenging. um, I don't absolutely love that. I got to be honest. You can't get away from all of these advertising messages. Then like you go to a mall these days. I don't like malls a whole lot, but you go to a mall these days, and so you have like you're completely surrounded by by shopping, right? You're surrounded by stores, and then in the middle of the mall, there's things, there's billboards or small, whatever they call them, with advertisements on them. So there's not enough commercial messaging being beamed directly into my skull. I need more, I need to read ads while I'm shopping, for whatever reason. So, yeah, not a big fan of that. So I think, um, I've got to wrap fairly shortly. I've been talking for about an hour, but I wanted to maybe give a um, couple pieces of information that may be helpful, like if you're exploring spirituality and that sort of thing. So some tips, not advice, tips. I don't want to give advice because you figure out what works for you, but just a couple of tips. One thing I think that is really helpful and actually sustaining is to develop a daily spiritual practice, otherwise known as the good old DSP. To have a daily spiritual practice that you do. It doesn't matter what it is. You could pray every day, meditate, do rituals every day, do yoga every day, whatever works for you. Having a daily spiritual practice is sustaining. If you're like, oh, this spirituality stuff is sustaining for me, um, make it a point to do it every day. Now, we live in a world where everybody's like, I'm too busy for that. I don't have whatever. Everybody has 5 minutes. Everybody has 5 minutes. Everybody has 10 minutes. Everybody could find a half an hour in their day. I don't care if you're working two jobs or, I worked, there was a time in my life. Yes, I was younger. I worked a full-time job. I went to college full-time. I had friends and a girlfriend, and I still meditated twice a day for half an hour each time. So definitely, you can find, if it's important to you, you will find time for it. Set your alarm clock 10 minutes earlier in the day and get up and do 10 minutes of meditation. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour thing, right? So daily spiritual practice is really important to help you maintain that connection, to help sustain you, to give you all the benefits of the things. All right. Explore different ideas about spirituality is always a good thing. You can watch YouTube videos. You can watch me live, and I'll talk about different spiritual ideas. You can check out other people's talks about things. See what resonates with you. Make sure it should feel really good to you. Be careful of things that are truthy, right? I've seen arguments for all kinds of stuff online. How do I do this without bashing anybody's specific belief system? Um, I will say I've seen religious figures who post a lot of stuff on Facebook like men shouldn't have ponytails because they'll go to hell, right? And I'm like, well, okay, show me where that men shouldn't do blah blah blah, or women should like blah blah because that's a demon, or like, be careful of stuff like that. One of these days, I'll compile a list of everything that I've seen online that religious people say you should avoid, specific religious people say you should avoid. And there'll be a long list, and nobody will be able to do anything. Don't drink water. That's the devil's juice. I don't know, whatever they, um, whatever they say. You're prohibited from everything. Everything. Um, Yeah. So uh be careful of that stuff. Be careful with gurus. I'm not saying don't do guru worship, don't find a spiritual teacher, don't, whatever. Um but you got to be careful when you hand your free will over to anybody. It's not something as a spiritual teacher I ever want. Everything I do with students is 100% consensual, meaning, hey, I would like you to do this journey. Does that sound okay to you? No, I'm not okay with that. Or no, I don't want to learn that. Or yeah, I'd really like to learn that, but can we do it in a different way? And the answer is yes. Okay. And I realize there are spiritual systems that are very regimented out there, and that's fine, but you should know what that is when you get into it. And I was looking at something recently. The school of they're basically teaching Tibetan Buddhism, but it's a couple of dudes who are not Tibetan, which I don't have a problem with. But apparently some of their students were saying, yeah, you have to get these certain empowerments, you have to take a vow to do everything they say without question. And I was like, oh, that's a big red flag. Right? That sounds like a cult more than somebody who's teaching you. Now, somebody might say, "Look, the X, Y, and Z are the tenets of the religion, and if you're not doing these, I really can't be your teacher." Right? Like if somebody came to me and said, I really want to do something that hurts other people," and I don't know what I would, I don't even know what I would teach that would be a thing. But um I won't be your teacher. Okay. And that's not dogma. That's just my personal ethics. Right. And I don't have, or better yet, somebody comes to me and says, I want you to teach me witchcraft. I don't know witchcraft. Right. I know, what I've read about it, but I haven't practiced witchcraft, or we'll say Wicca. I haven't practiced Wicca. I know people who are Wiccan. I know somebody could send you to, but if that's what you want to do, you're with the wrong teacher. That's not dogma. I'm not saying if you study with me, you can never do witchcraft, or, you're going to burn in hell, or you have to pledge obedience to me for the rest of your life. Be really wary about that stuff. And I'm not saying everybody out there who has like a lifetime pledge of you're now in this religion forever is bad or whatever, but there are enough people out there who will hurt you, who will take advantage of you under the guise of spirituality. You have to use some discernment there, right? You have to use some discernment. Like, oh, but this is a holy person. They would never harm anybody. Yeah, read a little bit. Okay, so just be wary of that kind of stuff. Don't hitch your wagon to somebody who wants to take your free will away. Know what you're getting into. Informed consent is everything in life. It really is. You should know everything. Like, don't if you go to your doctor and they prescribe a medication for you, understand what the side effects are. What are the possible side effects, right? What are the risks? What should I be on the lookout for? Kind of thing. If they don't offer those things up. Um, if you go into a relationship with somebody, um, particularly like consent, there are lots of schools about consent in relationships, particularly sexual relationships. Incredibly, incredibly important. Even with a partner that you've been with forever, and you make certain assumptions about things, don't do that. Get consent. Learn about that. But you should understand and know what you're getting into. Yeah, there are religious practices, spiritual practices that are secretive, and you won't know 100% know everything until you get into it. Um, but that is more like an initiation thing. So we tend to forget that we have the free will to learn about other ways of life and religion. We do, without adopting it. Absolutely. We all have the ability to observe and learn without becoming it. Right. So, I'll never, I remember in, I think it was seventh grade or something, middle school, um, teacher talked about, we were studying, it was geography, and we were studying the Middle East, and the teacher was talking about Islam and how Islam was, shaped the Middle East. You're talking about Saudi Arabia and Mecca and the Kaaba and all of those things and the pillars of Islam, the five pillars of Islam, and that sort of thing. He was not preaching, and some student raised his like, you can't talk about, and this is a typical middle schooler, you can't talk about that in class. You're not allowed. He's like, I am allowed to teach you about religion. I am not allowed to teach you religion. I think you should learn about other spiritual systems. Doesn't mean you adopt them, right? Doesn't mean like I said, I've been to lots of different services. I've been to, weddings and funerals and church services and temples and all kinds of stuff. I've lit incense at a Buddhist temple, and um, doesn't mean I've adopted those religions. But if I go there and and I am an observer or a participant in somebody else's ceremony, I'm going to be respectful because I would want the same thing. I think the golden rule is like the best rule ever. It is the best piece of rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Jesus said that, but what a lot of people don't know is that, 600 years earlier, Buddha also said that. Why? Because it just makes sense. It's like a really easy thing to understand ethical behavior, right? It doesn't, and it's not even, that's not even a religious thing. It's just ethical behavior. Don't do stuff to other people that you don't want them to do to you, right? Very simple, easy to understand. There's beauty in that simplicity, right? So do I want people to be respectful of my spirituality? Yeah, I do. So I want to be respectful of their spirituality to the full extent that I am able. But yeah, we can learn about all kinds of other systems. We can, and these days a lot of people mix stuff, and some people will have a problem with that. I don't. I think spirituality is incredibly individualistic. I think everybody, even if you are like, I am a devout whatever, and I follow the letter of the law of my religion, the way you do it is still completely different than the way anybody else does it. And some people will have a problem. Well, you're not doing the pure XYZ, or you're not blah blah blah, or you can't practice that because you weren't born into the right nationality or whatever. I don't want to get into cultural misappropriate. I'm going to say cultural misappropriation here. But I've had people tell me I can't practice shamanism because I'm not Native American. And first of all, not all Native American tribes are shamanic. Second of all, shamanism is global, universal, and has existed in almost every culture on the planet at some point. And my ancestors were shamanic. So if it is about ancestry or where you come from or whatever, but those people are speaking from ignorance, and they're thinking that I'm stealing, misappropriating something culturally. And they couldn't be farther from the truth. They're like, oh, and then other people say, you can't use the word shaman because that is a Siberian word. It comes from the Tungus people of Siberia. Okay, but that word has been in English for 300 years. And we don't have another word for it. And it also exists in Pali and Sanskrit and Chinese and Akkadian, and versions of it exist in many different languages. So the Tungus people didn't invent the word. I doubt that it came from maybe three or four languages before that. But yes, did it come into English? It came into English from Russian and German in the 17th century, and from there it came from some Siberian tribe, before that. Um, But yeah, the first book to use the word shaman in English is 1690s. So 325 years ago anyway. So the word's been around a long time, and 80% of of English words are loan words. 80% of the language, the only language that I speak fluently, come from other languages. So if we start parsing those out, can't say that. That comes from Spanish. You're not of Spanish descent. We're going to start like, okay, Bob, you can use these 150 words. Joe, you can use these 150 words. Sally, you can use a different 200 words. You're okay with those words. Like, we start getting into crazy town, in my opinion. And I'm not going there, but I will try to inform people when I feel like they're wildly misinformed. As good as their intentions may be, really good intentions can be spoiled spoiled by being ignorant of what you're speaking about. I had somebody one time, I was teaching a class, I was teaching an intro to shamanism class. And so there were ads out for it on Facebook or whatever. And this guy, who is not an indigenous person, by the way, saw the ads. And in the ads, there was a picture of a woman holding a drum, a shamanic drum. Um, in shamanism, very often, many of us use drums to journey. And he contacted the place where I was teaching and tried to have me kicked out of it. He contacted me directly and said, "You can't use these drums. They don't belong to you." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And what he was talking about was he thought that the drums that I was somehow representing indigenous cultures, um, indigenous American cultures, so Native American cultures, and I was not. And there was nothing representing that in any of my material. And in fact, when I teach shamanism, there's a section in there where I talk about this is not Native American spirituality. I don't know enough about Native American spirituality to teach it. I do not identify as a Native American person or belong to any Native American tribe. Therefore, I am not teaching their religious practices, nor would I. Um, but my ancestors used frame drums. In fact, I have, my Irish ancestors use a frame drum called a baran, still used today in Irish music. I have one. It is a frame drum with a hide over it, just the way frame drums are all over the world. So this person just didn't understand, like thought that anybody using a frame drum, that only Native Americans invented frame drums or something like that. I don't know how old frame drums are, but you see them in the Middle East, you see them throughout Europe, you see them in Africa, you see them throughout, you see them in the Americas, particularly in North America. Um, so anyway, enough about that, going down that path. I've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes. I'm going to wrap this up. I do want to thank you all for joining me. This is not the usual time or day that I do these. I just thought I would jump on since I'm snowed in. Perhaps give some people an opportunity to jump on one of these live that they normally aren't. Maybe some people on the West Coast, or you normally do these earlier and during the week. But and I don't have students till this afternoon, so here I am. Thank you all for joining me today. It's nice to see a few you of the usual folks jumping in, as well as some new folks as well. And with that, I will talk to you real soon. Don't forget, if you if you subscribe, you'll be informed about when I go live again, but also when there are other pre-recorded videos uploaded and stuff like that. So talk to y'all soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I almost said the west of your weekend.